Hi, witches. I'm Blair Bathory, and this is the Something Scary podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Whether this is your first time or you're one of the brave souls who join us every week. I hope you all had a happy Halloween this year. I can't wait to start doing videos for you all. That's coming very soon. But until then, we have 3 new terrifying tales for you all. And also, let me know in the comments on this video what you dressed up as for Halloween. I love hearing all your creative ideas. In the spirit of remembrance and in honor of our brave veterans, we proudly present the latest installment of one of our most popular themes, Ghosts of War. The echoes of battle resonate long after the fighting has ceased, leaving behind scars on both the land and those who served. Each story we share unveils the chilling encounters of those who face not only the horrors of war, but also the unsettling memories that will haunt us still today. First, one last goodbye, followed by a battle warning. Finally, in our last story, a relentless haunting. Before we get to our stories, I wanted to ask if you would take a minute to send this podcast to someone you know who loves horror. We know there are hundreds of podcasts out there, and the biggest influence on what people listen to is what their friends recommend. You can also rate and comment on our podcast on Spotify and YouTube, so let us know what you think. Thanks so much. We are incredibly grateful for all of the listeners around the world. So, want to hear something scary? Ghosts of War Part 5. Sometimes it's painful to say goodbye, and sometimes those goodbyes come too late, like in this story based on a true event submitted by Emma. Ohio was bone-chilling cold in December, and the streets had a muffled, quiet feel that night in 1968. Anna was only 15 when she was walking her usual path to her sister's house, the damp air biting through her coat and casting a foggy shroud around the dimly lit sidewalks. It was a familiar route, the same she'd walked 100 times before, winding through the sleepy neighborhood where every house was as well known as her own. Kurt Crumb's house was coming up ahead. The old house had a single streetlight casting shadows across its large oak tree, neatly trimmed hedges, where she'd seen him standing so many times before. Kurt had been like a big brother, a constant in her life, and one of the few adults she trusted. He'd taught her chess, taught her how to think ahead, always giving her a crooked smile as he won game after game. When his draft letter arrived, he looked at her with the same smile and said, "Don't worry, kiddo. I'll be back soon." But he hadn't come back. Not yet, anyway. As Anna rounded the corner, a strange flicker of movement caught her eye at Kurt's house. There, standing in the doorway, his figure perfectly outlined in the porch light, was Kurt. His expression was familiar, steady, warm, and yet somehow different. She could feel his gaze, the weight of it pressing into her chest like something heavy and unspoken. He raised a hand, a gentle wave, and after a hesitant movement, she waved back. Kurt's home, she thought with a quiet, strange thrill, half expecting him to call out a joke or invite her in for a game. She walked on, her mind spinning with possibilities. Perhaps he'd returned early, too tired to make his presence known yet. The thought filled her with a kind of joy and left her eager to tell her sister the news. She could imagine her sister's face lighting up, the relief on her parents' faces when they'd hear it too. But as soon as she arrived, something felt wrong. There was no celebration, no hushed excitement. And when she mentioned seeing Kurt in the doorway, her sister's expression faltered. It wasn't until she was back home that night, standing in the dim kitchen, that her mother's voice came in a quiet, heavy whisper. "Anna, Kurt's gone. He was killed by a landmine just 3 days ago. They say he died instantly." Her mother's eyes were raw and red, her voice choked. "He was so close to coming home. I'm so sorry, honey." Anna felt her heart pounding in her chest. her mother's words slow to sink in. "But I saw him. I saw him tonight, Mom. He waved at me in the doorway." Her mother's face softened, almost apologetic when she insisted it wasn't him. It was probably his mother standing there, hoping to see him walk up the drive. But Anna knew that wasn't true. The figure in the doorway hadn't been his mother's. She knew Kurt's face, the way he held himself, the way he looked at her, the way his eyes had held something deep, almost haunted. She had seen Kurt, no one else. She hadn't been mistaken. Over the next few days, Anna's mind became a tangle of thoughts, images of that night looping in her head, the way Kurt had stood there silent, just watching her. She'd wake in the middle of the night, her heart racing, feeling like someone was standing just outside her window, watching her. She tried to tell herself it was only her mind playing tricks, but she knew better. Kurt had been there, and the memory of his figure in the doorway grew sharper, more vivid, with each passing night. Then the dreams began. The first one was a blur of disjointed images, a shadowy figure, Kurt's face, the flash of a sudden, terrible explosion. In the dream, he looked at her from across a ruined chessboard, a faint, knowing smile on his face, as if he were waiting for her to make her move. When she tried to speak, to call out to him, the board vanished, and all she was left with was the heavy, pulsing sound of distant explosions, the faint crackle of static. When she finally told her friend about it, hoping for some grounding, the friend had only shrugged. Maybe he's stuck. Maybe he needs something like help moving on. The thought haunted her, Kurt lingering there, holding on to something he hadn't been able to let go of. Her mind replayed the details of his death, a landmine, they'd said, sudden, violent. Had he seen it, known what was about to happen, or had it been over before he could even understand? The thought of him alone, caught in that brutal moment before everything went black, filled her with a chill she couldn't shake. One night, feeling the strange, creeping weight of that thought, she walked by his house, stopping just at the edge of his yard. The house was dark, the windows empty and hollow. She could almost imagine him still there, standing in the doorway, looking out. Only now, she wondered if he'd been looking through her that night, to some distant place that only he could see. The faintest sound brushed against her ear, like a whisper, soft, echoing, barely there. And then, just for an instant, she saw him again, standing in the doorway, his face shadowed, eyes deep and hollow. His mouth moved, forming words she couldn't hear, couldn't understand. She closed her eyes, feeling an odd pressure in her chest, a silent understanding pressing against her as if he were saying goodbye. When she opened her eyes again, the house was empty, the doorway dark, and in the silence, there was something else, a quietness that felt final, like he'd been waiting for her to understand, to let him go. For a long moment, she just stood there in the cold, her breath rising in clouds, her heart racing. Finally, she turned and walked away, her footsteps soft, feeling the weight lift from her, leaving only the memory of Kurt Crumb in the doorway, a silent farewell from a friend who'd lingered just long enough to be remembered. Have you ever met anyone who you later learned was actually dead? Would you be able to find peace knowing their soul was still out there? Send us your stories by emailing somethingscary@snarled.com. Sometimes we get them into the podcast. World War II was a bloody war that pitted good against evil and spanned 3 continents. But deep in the Pacific, the horrors of war weren't the only thing that plagued the soldiers. Like in this story written by Sara Lukasiewicz. Sergeant John Morrison had seen his share of strange things in the war, but nothing had unnerved him as much as the disappearance of Private Huberman. The kid had always been so quick to laugh, but he changed in those last few days, staring off into the jungle as if something were calling to him. And then he was gone, vanished without a trace. The men whispered about the Green Lady, a story that had crept through the ranks about a woman who haunted the island. She was said to be the spirit of a native woman, dressed in green, who drifted between the trees at night. She warned of dangers, some said, and there were other, darker stories too, that she lured men into the jungle, and they were never seen again. John dismissed it as superstition, a ghost story passed down to cope with the horrors of war. But that night, standing watch on the edge of the camp, he began to feel an eerie stillness in the air, a presence watching from the shadows. His pulse quickened. As he sensed movement between the trees, a shape, a shimmer in the moonlight. He gripped his rifle, his eyes narrowing as a figure emerged. There she was, the Green Lady, her form as faint as smoke, her hair flowing down in waves that seemed to blend into the jungle itself. Her eyes hollow and deep, fixed on him. She raised a hand and beckoned, her mouth moving in whispers he couldn't make out, but which vibrated through him with a sorrow that felt eternal. Who are you?" he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. The words seemed to echo, pulling him toward her, but he resisted. A single thought pulsed in his mind. "Don't go." She continued to look at him, her eyes filled with a pain that felt all-consuming, and then she spoke, her voice like a soft breeze. "They're coming." The sound of footsteps jerked John back to reality. "The enemy. They're coming. We're surrounded." John's instincts kicked in, the vision of the Green Lady still vivid in his mind. With a surge of urgency, he rallied the men, directing them to defensive positions just as the enemy advanced through the trees. The skirmish was brutal, but thanks to her warning, they were prepared. They held the line, pushing the enemy back into the jungle as dawn broke, the echoes of gunfire finally fading. In the aftermath, John felt a hollow sense of victory. He'd survived, yes, but the memory of the Green Lady lingered, her mournful eyes etched into his mind. A chill crept over him when he remembered the stories, that the Green Lady wasn't just a warning but a curse. As days passed, John noticed something disturbing. The men who'd survived began acting strange. Jenkins, normally calm, had become tense and withdrawn, his gaze flickering toward the jungle as if he were watching something out of the corner of his eye. Another soldier, Porter, muttered to himself constantly, his voice a low, feverish murmur. Then, one night, Private Carson simply walked off, his gaze fixed on some unseen destination. John tried to stop him, but Carson was in a trance, mumbling about a woman waiting for him in the trees. The next morning, his gear was found discarded near the jungle's edge. He was never seen again. One by one, more of his comrades began slipping into strange behavior, their minds unraveling. They'd wake in the night, drenched in sweat, talking of her, the Green Lady. They'd seen her in their dreams, they said, her mournful eyes calling them, drawing them deeper into the jungle. John began to feel her presence too, an incessant whisper at the back of his mind growing louder each night. It was late one evening when John realized the truth. He hadn't warned them to save them. She'd marked them, using her spectral influence to draw them to her one by one. He could feel her in his thoughts now, a constant ghostly whisper that gnawed at his mind. The sorrow he'd seen in her eyes wasn't pity, it was hunger. By the end of the week, only a few men remained. Those who hadn't already disappeared avoided sleep, their faces hollow, their gazes distant. John could feel her presence pressing in, her voice clearer each night, whispering his name, beckoning him into the darkness. On the last night, he finally gave in. Exhausted, unable to resist any longer, he felt his feet move as if by their own accord, guiding him to the jungle's edge. He stepped forward, his vision blurring as her voice filled his mind, soothing and irresistible. He saw her ahead, the Green Lady, her figure glowing faintly in the darkness. As he walked toward her, he could feel the jungle closing in around him, swallowing him whole. Her gaze was soft now, inviting, her arms open to receive him. The last thing he heard was her voice, whispering, "Come, John, come to me." Before the world faded, her spectral embrace the only warmth he felt as he disappeared into the shadows. By dawn, the camp was empty. The few soldiers who'd arrived to relieve the outpost would find no trace of John or his men, save for a handful of scattered equipment at the jungle's edge, as if they'd walked willingly into the depths, following something unseen. The legend of the Green Lady would persist, but few would ever learn the truth, that her warning was only the beginning. She was not a guardian, but a lure, drawing men into her world, one soldier at a time, until they were lost to her spectral grasp forever. Could you ignore a ghostly warning, knowing it might actually be a curse? Would you be able to resist the whispers in the night? Why did John give in? Sometimes the echoes of war linger long after the last shot is fired, haunting those brave or unfortunate enough to hear them, like in this story inspired by Andrei. I had no idea what was coming. I was only 12, a 7th grader in 2019. I was attending a Catholic private school next to St. Polycarp Church in Cabiao, Laguna. I'd been to that church many times. It was where I had my first communion in grade 5. But that Sunday night, as Mass ended and my family and I headed toward our car, I'd had no idea this ordinary evening would take such a dark turn. The sun had just set, leaving a bluish-gray twilight across the church grounds. Shadows began to stretch over the cobblestone path, and the wind, sharp with an edge of chill, rustled the leaves nearby. We were parked on the left side of the church, and as I approached the car, something flickered at the edge of my vision. When I turned, my heart froze. A woman stood in the parking lot's shadows. She was dressed in old-fashioned clothing, as if she walked straight out of a black and white photograph from a century ago. Her dark skirt brushed her ankles, and the high neckline of her blouse seemed oddly formal. She just stood there, watching. Or was she even looking at me? I couldn't be sure. Her face was pale, almost colorless in the fading light, and she was as still as a statue. I blinked, trying to process what I was seeing. "Hey, look over there," I whispered, nudging my brother. "Do you see her?" He squinted in the direction I pointed, then shrugged. "There's no one there, just cars," he said, glancing at me like I'd lost my mind. When I looked back, the woman hadn't moved. She was still there, still silent. I thought about telling my parents, but something held me back. They'd just scold me, tell me I'd been watching too many ghost stories on YouTube or listening to too many creepy tales from my friends. I shook it off, told myself I was imagining things, and climbed into the car. That night, as we settled in at home, I tried to forget her. I played video games to distract myself until my mom called from the living room. "Where's the umbrella?" she asked. I froze. I must have left it at the church. After the usual scolding, she sent me back to fetch it. I dreaded returning to the darkened churchyard alone, but I had no choice. When I arrived, the place was quiet, too quiet, and empty except for a few teachers lingering near the entrance. Their presence was comforting, making me feel a bit braver as I walked inside. The interior of St. Polycarp was cavernous, its shadows thick and dense. Flickering candlelight danced along the stone walls, casting strange shapes and shadows. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the quiet pressing in on me, amplifying each step. My footsteps echoed as I made my way down the aisle, searching the pews for the umbrella. A slight movement in the corner of my eye caught my attention. She was there again. This time, the woman was sitting near the far corner in the shadows. She was staring at the altar with an expression that seemed peaceful, almost serene, as though the church had granted her solace. But as she slowly rose to her feet, turning toward the exit, I saw them, the bullet holes across her back. Dark, ragged patches marked her blouse, stains spreading from each wound. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to shout for help, but my voice felt trapped in my chest. She started to move, her figure drifting slowly across the aisle toward the exit. Her calm expression turned to something unreadable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was somehow aware of me, her presence heavy with unspoken pain. I turned and bolted, racing down the aisle, past the pews, and out the door. I barely registered the janitor, who gave me a curious look as I sped past. "Kid, what's wrong?" he asked, but I couldn't answer. My legs carried me to the street, and I hailed the first tricycle I saw, desperate to put distance between me and that church. When I finally made it home, I could barely breathe. My family asked me what had happened, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. How could I explain seeing a ghostly woman with bullet holes? And why would they believe me anyway? The next morning, waiting to be picked up from school, I found myself alone with Father Emil, the priest. Summoning all my courage, I decided to tell him everything. He listened in silence, nodding thoughtfully as I recounted the night's events. When I finished, he let out a deep sigh. "What you saw is not unheard of," he said, voice low. "There's a story, a tragic one, passed down through the priests here. St. Polycarp witnessed a massacre during the Philippine-American War. Sometime in the early 1900s, the people had gathered for Mass, just as you did last night. But on that day, American soldiers stormed in, dragging the congregation outside. They showed no mercy. Men, women, children, all lined up, executed on the spot. It said the priest was the only survivor, escaping to tell the tale." The weight of his words pressed down on me like a cold stone. The thought of those soldiers, their guns blazing in the house of God, and the innocent lives lost. It was a horror I couldn't fathom, and yet, I'd seen one of those souls myself. "She was one of them," I whispered, realizing. "The woman." Father Emil nodded. "Some say her spirit lingers here, trying to reach out to the living, to tell her story. The janitor, he has experienced things too. Every night, he reports strange shadows in the church, hears voices and footsteps when no one's there. He even hears the screams sometimes, children's laughter turning to cries, adults calling for mercy." I shivered, feeling the weight of those restless spirits surrounding us, their pain suspended in time, echoing through the years. "Why did I see her?" I asked. Was she trying to tell me something? Father Emil placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Spirits reached out for many reasons. Maybe she wanted to be seen, or perhaps she wanted you to remember her, to bear witness to the past. As my dad's car pulled up, I looked back at the church, its stone walls now haunted by a history I'd never imagined. The spirit's presence lingered in my mind, her figure etched into my memory. I wondered if I'd ever see her again, if she would come back to share whatever she couldn't say in life. But I didn't want to know. Some things, I realized, are better left in the shadows. And as I climbed into the car, I offered a silent prayer for her, for all of them, hoping they'd find peace someday. To this day, visitors say that St. Polycarp holds memories that refuse to fade, that linger as silent witnesses to a bloody history. And if you ever find yourself there, standing in the church alone at night, don't be surprised if you feel someone watching. She's still there, waiting to be seen, carrying her silent story in the bullet holes across her back. What would you do if souls from a tragedy tried to reach out to you? Would you be able to attend events at a building that had spirits luring there? Has this happened to you or anyone you know? This week's podcast stories were edited by Sara Lukasiewicz, narration by Blair Bathory, audio edited and mixed by Fitz Harris, additional audio editing by Calvin Linderman, produced by Anna Villalobos, executive produced by Gail Gilman, music by Sapphire Sindalo and Calvin Linderman.